So, thanks for coming. Like I said to the few guys that were here a little bit earlier, this is not... today's going to be just a little bit lighthearted, right? I'm going to tell you some stories from my past, hopefully things you can learn from, or hopefully things that you can laugh along with and have experienced yourself, because I think most of us here are quite experienced developers. How many of you are developers? Or identify as a developer? Yeah, most, cool. And development management, or team leadership, project management, okay, yeah, a few as well. So hopefully we'll see some parallels. Hopefully I can share you my experiences, tell you some fun stories. But before I go into that, that's just setting up for the talk, I want to briefly explain who I am for those of you that don't know me. I know that because I'm talking to a Dutch audience, you'll know this icon here. I'm from Coolblue, I'm Pat, I'm an Australian. I moved here about 4.5 years ago with my family, and I'm currently a development manager at Coolblue. We'll get into how I became a development manager at Coolblue, but I'm currently a development manager at Coolblue. I'm a .NET developer, have been. I remember the announcement of the .NET framework and thinking to myself, this is probably something cool, and I should switch from VB6 and COM ugliness over to .NET, and kind of sat with C# and F# ever since. Father and husband, like I said, relocated with my wife and my 2 lovely children, and I'm currently residing in Rotterdam, which is also where the headquarters of Coolblue is. So I appreciate coming from Australia to the Netherlands and being able to walk to work. It's or ride my bike actually, but that's yeah. If you have questions today, if you like my stories or you want to follow up or you want to catch up, I'm on Twitter and you can send me an email. It's quite an original email address. I'm very lucky to have been given it, but it makes it a lot easier for when I'm talking to you all. And yeah, can say to you, it's pat@coolblue. Simple. So, before I talk about my growth from developer to dev manager or share my stories with you, I want to tell you a little bit about Coolblue itself, all right? How many of you have heard like the Coolblue story or have seen someone present the Coolblue story before? At least a few. I recognize a few faces, so cool. I'll run through it really, really quickly. Coolblue's main vision, our main goal, our main differentiator is that we will do anything for a smile. So this is obviously in Dutch, I don't need to explain it to you, but because it's being recorded, alles voor een glimlach directly translates to anything for a smile. And for that, we're talking about to our customers, but also towards our developers, development teams, towards the way we do things. It's really part of our company culture. We're quite successful at this. I'm happy to be able to share this slide publicly. We started back here in the year 2000 with there is a 1 pixel line here. You'll need to trust me on this one, right? We started in the year 2000 and we've been lucky enough to go on a massive hockey stick type curve ever since, culminating in last year's numbers of 1.2 billion euros revenue. So super, super happy with that growth. I try normally and make a joke about correlation and causation because I joined Coolblue about here, but that's, yeah, it doesn't fly so well. I am a member of the development department, obviously development manager, it's a part of my title, but since I've joined, Coolblue has grown and grown and grown and grown. Just about every 18 months we double in size, and we're currently at about 300 or about 250 developers, about 300 people in the tech department. So I'm talking about quite a relatively large span of control, 40 odd teams, most of them working in a Scrum-like fashion, using agile principles at least, which I think would upset maybe Sander Hogendorn if you guys were in his talk from just before the break. To know that it was so homogenous. But basically, yeah, there's a lot of us, okay? Just to give you the background. And a lot of us do a lot of learning, all right? It is one of the cultural values at Coolblue. It is something that I take seriously as well. The way that I like learning best, again, obviously this counters Sander from before the break, but I like learning from books. So today I'm going to be sharing, sure, some of my stories, but also some of the books that I've read along the way, to hopefully give you guys, add to your reading lists if reading is something you do, but hopefully give you some other references as well to get some other points of view. Ones that I agree with, happens to be, that makes it easier to talk about, but some other some other and sometimes more established points of view, which is better than I can do today. To start with, the first one that I want to share with you is this one, and the title of the book literally is what I'm going to be telling you today. Right? What got me to a certain level isn't what got me further, and certainly I think the same is true for anyone in this room that's grown from development into development management or from one role to another. Okay, so what got you here won't get you there. But the biggest takeaway that I got out of this book is basically this quote. So looking backwards, and I think if you do some self-reflection and look backwards through your careers as well, it's not about creating change. Obviously, you can't change anything, but it is about understanding what happened. Okay, so you look back, how did I do this year? How did I do the year before? What do I want to do? What do I want to achieve? And then what has worked for me in the past? And what do I need to change to make that better? Okay, so this is like a running background theme of today. All right, we're going to be looking backwards through my career in this case to learn and to understand what I have changed to improve myself, and hopefully if you follow a similar sort of exercise, what you can change or what you can leverage from your past experience to get you where you want to go next. So we want to look backwards. We want to experience, go back through our experiences, do some self-reflection. And for me, that's where I got the subtext of the talk that I'm going to be giving today. The more things have changed for me, the more they stayed the same. So I moved from I've been doing several development roles over the course of my career, obviously. And the more things have changed, the more they've stayed the same in regards to the 4 topics that I'm going to be talking about today. I hope by the end of it you'll also come to understand where this comes from, but if you don't, let me know towards the end. And feel free to jump in as well. So yeah, we're going to be looking backwards. We're going to be trying to gather some understanding. I'm going to be doing this by telling you 4 stories today. And the 4 topics of these stories that I want to talk to you about are to listen, to own, to fail, and to assist. Okay, so these are 4 things that I've gone through, 4 topics that I think are very important, and 4 things that change as you go along, but also stay the same. So, in telling you these stories, there's a nice structure that I've come up with that I think helps it to land a little bit better. Basically, I'm going to show you a tweet. Something that inspired me to think about a certain topic, or something when I was thinking about the topic, and I use Twitter fairly regularly, so something that I would have scrolled past. You'll also notice the dates on most of these are quite new as well, because this whole talk is quite new for me. I'll then go and tell you the story. There's only going to be a boring icon up on the slide, because part of today is sharing my stories with you. All right, it's a little bit I don't know, egotistical, a little bit arrogant maybe, in thinking that my story can be directly applied to you, but I hope that you can get the theme out of the story and see how you could apply it. And because I said I read a lot and learn a lot from books and try and use books to use the learnings from others that have been put into print to help me improve myself, I'll be sharing a recommendation of a book for each of these 4 topics as well. I will recap them at the end and share the slides with you after. If you're interested, just come up and let me know if you want a copy of the slides, or feel free to take photos as we go along. And of course, like I did at the start, I'll try and show you how that book mapped to the topic by using a key quote from the book that I've recalled or remembered. So let's get started. I want to start with listening. We'll go in not a clockwise manner, we'll go through these stories. I'm going to start with listening though, and the tweet that I think inspired this one and made me think back over the course of my career is basically this one from Erin. She said, if you got into programming because you thought you wouldn't have to interact with people, I'm very, very sorry, but someone lied to you. I think most of us, especially I think nearly all of us raised our hands at the start in answering that we were developers. You know that you need to have many, many, many conversations, all right? And the best value, the way for you to deliver your best work is to have those conversations. So instead I want to tell you about a time where I didn't want to communicate, where I didn't want to listen, where I didn't want to have a conversation. This is way back at the start of my career, so junior dev or developer as I was at that point in time. I overheard a project manager and a senior member of the team talking about a database being slow, right? Why was the database being slow? What was taking so long? Why were these things so complex? How come we couldn't figure this out? And I was fairly eager. I was also fairly arrogant, fairly self-absorbed in my own skill set at the time, and went, I know how I can figure this out for you. And I went into our code base at the time, and it was we were using CI/CD processes, and it was quite a good structure. We had quite some pieces of a good CI/CD process in place, except for the 4 eyes principle, which for those of you that are familiar with this, basically GitHub pull requests is a good example of that, or pair programming, right? So having someone sit with you while you're doing something and explaining it to them. Going through 4 eyes before something, for 2 sets of eyes before something goes into production is always a good pattern. But we didn't have that as part of this process at the time. So as a developer on the team, I had every opportunity to write a quick short wrapper in my mind around the core database abstract base class that would put a stopwatch in, instantiate a stopwatch, start a stopwatch, and then go off and pass it off to the virtualized database call, complete the database call, come back, stop the stopwatch, log the results of that stopwatch, and then discard the stopwatch. And I thought it was genius. I was like, these guys, next time they're having that conversation, or maybe I can even prove myself before they have that conversation next time. Why is it going slow? Where is it slow? I can walk up to them and say, wait, I know exactly where it is, right? Here's our average log times, all this sorts of stuff. Average database query times. Now, I saw a few of you smile when you saw me mention instantiating a stopwatch inside the database response or database interaction class, and then disposing of it after the SQL query came back. I also saw a few of you grin as well when I said I logged in there. Clearly there was no dependency injection or any sort of good development practice based around this. It was literally in C# var SW equals new stopwatch start, right? It was, I didn't take any care to make sure things were disposed of properly at all. Because we didn't have the 4 eyes principle, that went straight up into production, and basically things started slowing down from there. Now, the way .NET's designed, it will do very, very aggressive garbage collection. It will try and make sure that your application itself is performant, and will try and clean up after itself as it goes along. And as memory gets, or especially back when I was doing this sort of development, I think it was .NET 1 point something, maybe 2 at the time, .NET 2 at the time. As memory got constricted, the garbage collector got more and more aggressive, right? Obviously, because there's less memory, so it tries to free up more and more and more. But these stopwatches were in use because there were long-standing database queries going out, right? It was an absolutely horrific position to get in to watch the CPU and memory utilization of the web servers at the time absolutely shoot through the roof. I then caused the result of that was a significant production outage for what at the time was a relatively small company, and no one could understand why. What had changed that meant that the logging and the metrics that we were tracking over time, watching our user base, had all of a sudden dropped off, and why the monitoring and metrics that we were tracking at the time for instance usage, this is before we had auto-scaling and cloud and this sort of stuff, so we had on-premise servers, and why their usage all of a sudden exploded. Me being a developer and going, okay, cool, I've done a good job, I'm going to put that to the side for next time, walked away from that situation, went home, and this is Australia, so I had a very long commute. I was sitting in a train for a large number of hours to get home, and realized when my lead at the time called me and said, what did you do? Yeah, it took about 3 days for us to recover from this properly, and apparently, but never, I never double checked, but apparently I was told there were permanent impacts on the wellness of that user base. So basically we lost some customers because of it. It's not something I'm proud of, but it is something that I learnt from. And we'll get back to that when I start talking about failure. So this is something that was so small, so insignificant, right? Caused a significant outage. I went away. I didn't tell anyone about it. So the key part here is communicating and having that communication with someone. It turns out that the lead developer knew the answers. It's just that he didn't want to tell the product manager / sales guy, we were a small company, at the time what parts of the application were causing the slowness. So me overhearing that conversation, going all the way back to the problem, what problem was I trying to solve? Going all the way back to that problem statement of I'd overheard a conversation, I then tried to be proactive and didn't do it well and tried to not hide it, but not get anyone else involved, not take the precious time of my team lead, meant that, yeah, we, at the end, fast forwarding all the way to the end, we lost customers because of it. Okay, so you guys aren't junior devs, right? Most of you are developers, I would assume, with significant amounts of experience, having those conversations, right? Being involved in those conversations, trying to figure out what the actual problem is, and taking initiative is very, very important, but making sure that you understand the situation that you're in before you take that initiative is very, very valuable, okay? And being able to trade the pros and cons of technical choices that you're going to make, so instantiating a stopwatch class in this case, understanding the pros and cons of having that so closely coupled to the database was also very important for me, or a very important learning opportunity for me. There's a great book that covers this off. Now again, you guys might not be starting your development careers, but this is angled at people that are starting their development careers. But it still has some key takeaways. If it's a nice, quick, easy read. It's not an easy read because it provokes a lot of thoughts, I think. But the key quote that I've got here is one that I've basically been sharing with you now, in that good programmers are good communicators. They talk, write, code, right in the middle there, then listen and read well, okay? Now, you guys are, I would assume, all Dutch, because we're in a Dutch audience at SDN. It doesn't matter, it doesn't say anything here about English, it doesn't say anything here about Dutch, it doesn't say anything here about fluency, right? It does say that you are good communicators, all right, in a way that enables you to get your point across to the other person. So for me, that's the biggest takeaway from this point, right? The first thing that I learned, not only do you need to add 4 eyes and you need to be careful of the code that you're writing and contributing, but also that you need to be able to communicate, and you should communicate the things you're working on. So that's my story about listening. Really straightforward. I made a massive mistake. I hope that you can learn from it. I then want to switch and talk about ownership. Ownership is a significant part of the culture and the mindset that we have inside the development department at Coolblue. But this story isn't from Coolblue. The best example, some people get confused when I talk about what is ownership. So the best example I have here is Nick Craver. How many of you know who Nick is? Nick Craver is? No? How many of you use Stack Overflow? Yeah, most, right? I would say all, but I'm not too sure. Okay. As soon as Stack Overflow has an outage, nearly every time I've seen that Stack Overflow has an outage, or not even an outage, but a slowdown, you get the bot at the top, or I'm sorry, it's being recorded. I'm not sure whether this is a bot or whether this is an actual human at the top updating the Slack status, right? But the Stack Exchange status Twitter account. But basically, a statement goes out, right? There will be, we're currently suffering from XYZ. Nick, to me, exemplifies what ownership is, because then he publicly comes in nearly every time with, this is what I know, this is where we're at, and I will get back to you. And he says that publicly, right? Stack Overflow is very important for each and every one of us. So in this case, yeah, there's an outage. It doesn't necessarily matter what the item is, but within a few minutes of the original post, he comes in and says, this is what we know, right? This is what I'm allowed to say publicly, and this is what we know. And he makes that call for himself. It's not that he's checked that with someone else. From my understanding of this, I've never had the opportunity to ask him in person, but I've read a lot of his stuff. And right underneath here, there's a reason that I left the rest of the thread in as well. He actually comes back within about 15-20 minutes and actually explains what was going on. So he says at the top, this is what I know, this is where we're at, I will get back to you, and then comes back immediately, or as soon as he can, and says, this is actually what was happening, right? So for me, that's what I mean when I say ownership. I don't necessarily mean a name in an Excel document. I don't necessarily mean a stakeholder allocation tag on Jira. I mean people that are willing to step up and take responsibility for things. So for this one, how many of you recognize what this is? Not yet? Vuvuzela! Hey, we have someone that watched the World Cup. That's what this looks like, right? It's a vuvuzela. It is a horn played in, I think, majority of sporting events in South Africa and in that region. And it makes a absolutely horrible noise, especially when you have many, many, many of them. How many of you watched the 2010 World Cup? A few. How many of you remember that droning noise? Yeah, horrible, right? Horrible. Absolutely horrible. So, vuvuzela makes a horrible droning noise. At around about the time of the 2010 World Cup, I was very, very fortunate to be part of a team that secured the rights to broadcast that for free to their user base over the mobile telecommunication network, right? So we're talking the era of Nokia, BlackBerry, maybe the first 1 or 2 iPhones, that sort of era where your phones weren't necessarily as insane as they are today. They weren't mobile computers, they were, devices you use to make phone calls, receive texts, and maybe, if you had a smart enough phone and a smart enough browser, browse the internet rudimentary, right? In a very rudimentary way. And I was, the rights were secured by our also run, our second place telecom provider, right? And this was their, so you basically have a Vodafone, T-Mobile, take your pick here, but it was basically the second largest one in Australia at the time. And this was their big opportunity to make their customer base immensely happy, pull a lot of people onto the platform because we were going to give you this over 3G data at the time for free. So the team that I was on had written a video transcription application, and it would process the live feed as it was coming in from FIFA and from the SBS, and then transcode that into a binary format that your phone could understand before pushing it across the airwaves into the app on your phone. All right, so it was a very real-time, very highly intense application. It was an amazing project to work on, and the World Cup was a phenomenal success that year. I had quite a lot of fun sitting up at 3 a.m. in Australia watching all the games. But this drone was horrible, right? So the telecom provider at the time put out a massive press release and said, all of our customers will get this for free, all of them, right? If you become a customer, we'll also give it to you for free. So obviously, a nice big pool of people onto their network. And with this, the network was fine, they tested that. The devices, our application could handle that. Basically, your device came, we got your signature, we created a video that would work for you, we sent it over the airwaves to you. It was amazing, in theory. The noise, the reason that it wasn't an amazing success in practice for the first 2 days, I'm talking the first 48 hours of the World Cup, is because if you've ever sat on the train, how many of you catch the train regularly here? The NS? No? Okay. Sure. Lucky. How many of you have sat opposite someone on public transport, on a train, on a bus, on a plane, and they've had they've played music through their loudspeakers? Or they've, had their feet up on the seats, right? The annoying person on public transport. Now imagine half the people on the train, right, are trying to watch a football game, because that's very important, right? Australia's a very sporty nation, and I think we were actually in this one, but I didn't fact check that before I started, so I probably should have. And the whole train starts making that vuvuzela noise because that's the sound that's coming through your phone, right? And your phone, it wasn't a nice high fidelity Dolby HD whatever. No, it was a tiny little thin paper speaker in the bottom of your Nokia or your BlackBerry, so it just made the most annoying, shrieking, piercing noise. And for those of you that are good public transport travelers, you put headphones on and you're like, this is fine. I can watch the soccer on the way to work, and I'm going to have my headphones on. I'll have my screen just here, and I've got my battery pack because these phones didn't have great batteries. And then all of a sudden that noise is going straight into your ears, right? It was not a success for the first 30-something hours, until we were able to go in and ask the SBS, hey, there's this noise coming through on the feed, this frequency. It's destroying phones. It could actually break a speaker on one of the Nokia models. Funny story, separate to this though. And so we went back to FIFA and the SBS and said, you've got to do something about this. Like, you're causing a problem. We need you to clean up that audio signal. We need you to, give us a feed that doesn't have that droning, buzzing noise in it, right? Because it's not... We bought this feed from you to give to our customers for free because we were going to get commercial success from it. We're not getting that commercial success, so therefore we don't want to continue buying this video if you can't fix it. FIFA and the SBS, in their nature, as we've come to learn since, in many, many lawsuits against the FIFA governing body itself, basically just went, we're filming the game and we're sending it to you. That is our obligation, so go away, all right? And this was the first opportunity that I had, or the first example I had, to truly own a real, live, big problem. Thankfully, the vuvuzela, you guys that recognize the noise, has a very specific frequency, right? And I already told you earlier in the story, we were doing live video transcription. So I wrote a little noise pass filter, right, that pulled out that specific frequency and just dropped it, right? Everything except for that frequency would come through. The only downside of the filter was that occasionally the broadcaster's voices would pass through that band, and so that it'd sound like the broadcaster was, the voiceover was dropping out a little bit, but that was a cost we were willing to bear if we didn't have to give the vuvuzela noise to our customers. We pushed this live. We said, we, as the external party contracted to the massive telecommunication body, we will own this and we will solve this for you. All right, and that was an amazing success. It turned out 2 days later, which is a completely separate story, but 2 days later, FIFA also put in that same noise band filter, written themselves and integrated into the voice, the audio, because everyone hated that noise, that buzz, that frequency. But for those 2 days, we were the telecom provider's absolute best friend. All right, and they didn't care how we got it solved. That wasn't their challenge. They didn't care that FIFA was or wasn't fixing it. They just needed that to be gone, and so we had the opportunity to take ownership. So finding an opportunity in your organization, in your situation, in your environments where you can take that ownership is, I think, going to make a lot more people happy than you realize. Yeah? I've been on the lookout for those opportunities ever since. Taking ownership has certainly been the helping, an assisting factor in a lot of the steps that I've taken in my career, because I've solved a real problem for someone. There's a great book on this one. I've read this book, I think, 3 times over now. And it's not necessarily a normal management book or a book that a developer would pick up and read, I think. All right? It certainly doesn't scream computer programming to anyone that I've handed it to. But basically, this is a book from Jocko and Leif, Jocko Willink, who now has a second book out just recently. But this book is all about extreme ownership. And it talks about his time in the US Navy when he was deployed into war zones and the ownership that he needed to take. The ability for him to be in a war zone and take ownership of a problem and solve it so that it didn't become a problem for someone else. He has because he was a Navy SEAL, he was in the Navy, he has a very specific way of thinking, and that definitely comes through in his writing. And basically he says it's not what you preach, so it's not the words you say. I'm here telling you a story today. Most of it is factually accurate. Some of it has been embellished for the purposes of entertaining you, but it's not about what you say or what you preach. It's about the things that you'll tolerate. All right? We, as the customer, as the middleman, we didn't tolerate that noise leaving us, right? Because if the customer wasn't happy with the video feed that was coming through from FIFA, they would also cancel our contract because they didn't need video transcoding if they weren't getting a video to transcode, right? This was actually quite straightforward, so we chose not to tolerate that noise, the vuvuzela noise coming through. So that's my story about ownership and finding opportunities for ownership in your roles. Please, wherever you can, right? And if you can read the book, give it a go. I know it's not a normal book that I would recommend to a software developer, but for someone that's interested in how to own something or other examples of ownership, it's a great read. Everybody's favorite, my favorite as well. I want to talk about failure and learning. So, Matt tweeted this out not so long ago. He basically said the apprentice knows they need to go on a journey, and the master knows that that journey never ends, right? And I think that's quite a clean statement. I think it infers a lot. Basically, how many of you are senior developers, or lead developers, or chief architects, or right? And you know that you're here today. You never stop learning, all right? You're always wanting to pick up more. You're always wanting to get better. So you know that your journey never ends. When you're a junior dev, that's very, very different, right? You're like, oh, I just need to do X, Y, Z, and then I can get to meteor, a Dutch term that I never really understood, but I can get to developer. Then I just need to do these checklists, and I can get to senior developer. And then eventually you end up here, and you realize, wait, well, I've been doing this for X many years now. It never ends. For me, this is really, really true when I made this mistake less than 2 years ago. I was team lead at the time of the pricing team. All right, I work for Coolblue. Coolblue has a need for pricing, right, or for some sort of pricing logic. So we had written an app that would automate our pricing. Based off a whole bunch of different factors, the cost that we buy goods for, the how many we've got in the warehouse, what the customer demand looks like, a whole bunch of input factors go into this application. All right, and the punchline's up here on the screen already, but basically we had microwaves, and we accidentally priced them somehow at 0. When you're writing let me take a break for a second, right? When you guys are writing software, how many of you do TDD? 1. That's about what I expected. And now you're being called on it by your colleague in the back, huh? Are you doing any sort of TDD or test-driven development? Yeah? Yeah, okay. How many of you have tests in your production code base? Yeah, at least the 2 TDD guys, but I would expect, a few others, right? It's probably about half of the audience that I've picked that put their hand up and said, yeah, we have tests, which is great. Coolblue also has tests. We write C#. There's great tools for testing .NET languages. So we have many, 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 many tests. It helps us find edge cases. Some teams are doing TDD and that sort of work. But basically, each definition of done, because we're working in an agile way, has your work is covered by a test. It's, I think, as simple as that. I had so many tests covering this pricing logic, I thought it was going to be fine. All right? But then one of the factors we take into account is the size of a product. Because for an e-commerce retailer, especially someone that ships things, the size of a product is very, very important. All right? So we would take the length, the breadth, the height, right, the width, and we would take all the dimensions of the product into account when we were figuring out how we're going to ship this, and therefore, how much does that cost us? All right, to give you a little bit of insight into the Coolblue logistics side of things. So how much is this going to cost us to send through PostNL or bpost, that sort of thing? And that gives us a basic size category type calculation. Until a buyer someone completely unrelated from the pricing process, goes in and says, we're starting a new line of commercial microwaves, very, very expensive commercial microwaves, and I don't have the dimensions for the product yet because this is a new product, so I'm going to put in 0 for all the values, and that'll allow me to submit the form. Now, 0 times 0 times 0, length, breadth, height, right, produces 0. And 0 times any price that you could have come up with produces 0. Yeah, no. Because there was one guy, the reason, we can talk about that briefly, I'm going all right for time. The reason we found this, and this is, it's being recorded, but I think I'm allowed to say this, was because we had a gentleman, these are big commercial microwaves, right? We're not talking your little kitchen one. No, we're talking like big, proper industrial commercial ones. So they come in a box that's quite large. And he had gone on the website and saw them at €0 and went, oh, this is interesting. How many can I order? 24. Okay, sure. 24 times 0 is 0. So he paid 0. And he went, look, I don't really want this to rock up at my house because then they'll know exactly where I live. So instead, how about I get it delivered to a Coolblue store? Sure, that's a proposition we offer, right? You can get products delivered to a store. We will then, at the store, help you load them into your car or put them to the side for you. You can come in and pick them up at your convenience. So he gets it delivered to a store. Nothing unusual to this point. The no red flags have been raised by, and that's a different story about failure, but no red flags have been raised by the €0 invoice. No red flags have been raised anywhere through the logistical process because we're shipping these commercial microwaves to a store. That's fine, right? If you're shipping it to a high fraud neighborhood, something like that, maybe it would have tripped something, but instead it's going to a store. So all the individual pieces so far, size category calculation, price calculation, displaying on the website, it's got a value. That value happens to be 0. Invoicing, logistics, all this sort of stuff. Everything times 0 hasn't individually, none of those things have raised red flags. He rocked up at the store and backed up the biggest truck you can get from Bow Rent, right? And went, can you give me a hand? And Coolbluers, anything for a smile, no worries. 3 guys from the store and this guy grab a corner each and load 24 of them into this truck, right? Paperwork matches. Guy's name's on here, his driver's license checks out. The invoice, it doesn't matter, that's been posted to his home address. So, thank you, have a good day, goodbye. He drives away, right? And the guys say, that was a big purchase, I wonder where he comes from. And they go back to the computer. He must be starting a restaurant or a commercial kitchen or something. I wonder, this is going to be interesting. And look him up and say, wait a minute. He paid nothing for those. And asked someone else internally, chased it down through customer service, that must have been a glitch. Sure enough, we find out, no, he paid €0 for these. Now, the gentleman himself was very nice and kind and returned 23 of the 24, and we allowed him to keep a beautiful commercial microwave for his kitchen because it is anything for a smile. But that day we learnt a lot of lessons, right? I learnt that surviving through failure is one thing, especially when you've got such an amazing user base as we do. But individually, pieces of a system can be tested and you can be confident in them. All right? I pushed that change live that multiplied the size category without the appropriate testing. And someone else had to fix that for the customer. All right? We had to have a different story somewhere along the way. So my biggest takeaway for this one is failure will happen. Right? It's the pieces that you learn from it. This could have been horrible. It turned out that it wasn't because, thank you, kind gentleman that returned 23 of the 24 and was willing to do it, you know, with a bit of a laugh and a bit of a nice high five and a thank you very much. But yeah, this will happen. All right. Individually, no one piece of our system failed at all. So in theory, that shouldn't be a failure. But overall, holistically, to steal for those of you that were in the previous session, you get that joke, sorry. Yeah, that whole process failed, right? And that boiled down to a change that I made. The best example I have of this is from this book. This is one of my favorite books of all time. And it's basically fail early, fail often, but always fail forward. Right? This is also why I personally am against things like revert commits. It's why I'm personally in favor of things like trunk-based development, talking about development practices, because you always have to step forward. Right? You made a mistake, and that happened. Don't rewrite history and pretend it didn't happen. Learn from it, prevent it from happening again, and fix it. Okay? So for me, I would much rather see contribution 1, 2, and 3, and then, oh shit, fixing contribution number 2, and then, oops, fixing the fix to contribution number 2, right? Then see, oh, contribution 1, 2, and 3, and everything's fine and green in production. All right? Rewriting your Git history, or doing contributing to, reverting it, contributing to, reverting it, contributing to. Yeah, it's yeah. For me, those are warning signs already in your process. For me, failing forward is what's important here. So yes, we were very, very fortunate that we could go and readdress the microwave situation. But for us, yeah, we failed forward. We added a new rule that said price must be greater than €0, right? Which is already complex, because what happens if you want a free item with an item? So a gratis matcher, a free with, which doesn't directly translate in English. But a bonus item you need to ship, you need to put a value on the line item order. Yeah, there's a lot more complexity to it than 0 can't be allowed on an invoice, because many, many times you want 0 to actually appear on an invoice. So, fail forward. That's my story about failure, and I think we're doing perfectly fine for time. Do you guys have questions about that one? No? I saw a lot of you laughing at my mistakes, so I think it's going well so far. That's all I wanted to see. So, yeah, it's generally trending in the right direction, yes. But you make too many of those €0 mistakes, and that won't continue trending in the right direction, right? So yes, 1.2 billion euros is a nice big number, but yeah, times €0 doesn't produce the right value. So I want to talk about assist. For me, this is from Julie. I don't want to butcher her last name. But she is basically the head or the VP of design at Facebook itself. Okay, she produced a book just recently, and it'll be available for sale soon, about the making of a manager. And then she released a whole bunch of Medium blog posts talking about the book and drumming up sales and that sort of stuff as well. It's not so much as me recommending you this book, because I haven't read the book yet. But it's more about finding ways to assist others is what I want to leave you guys with. Most of you, when I said, are you senior developers? Are you lead developers? Are you in charge of a team? Are you a project manager? Most of those roles come with contributing and assisting and helping others, okay? Not just working with them, but maybe helping to teach them, coach them, mentor them, something like that, okay? Julia herself is a great example of this, where she puts out a lot of content to try and help other managers get better. So for me, the best example I have of this one is something that I've only completed recently, and something that maybe you've seen, not of mine, but more generally, and that is a manager README. How many of you know what I'm talking about when I say manager README? No? So when you're developing an application, let me go back here, all right, because the contents of it aren't necessarily important. When you're developing an application, how many of you fill out like the README? Right, put a basic description of what the product is, what it's trying to achieve, maybe the design goals that it started with, if there's any sort of execution mechanism, right? You can, this is how you run me type deal, or this is how you can execute this code base. Maybe you've even got a, this is how you can build this application written out in your README. Basically, the concept of a manager README is exactly the same, except applied to a person. So naturally a little bit soft around the edges. There's no easy line I can give you. There's no one-line Perl script I can give you to produce this, unfortunately. Or you, or you, or you. We're all different, right? So we can't just make build person. It doesn't really work. But the manager README is about as close as it gets, in my opinion. So I produced this last updated 5 months ago, so I have a statement on there about how fresh it is, of course. There are sections in here that aren't even finished yet, okay? I still, for example, haven't fleshed out a lot of the templates that I do use when I'm talking to direct reports or when I'm helping and coaching and assisting others, developing performance improvement plans, stuff like that. But this is something that I give to everyone that will come to report to me. All right, so most team leads, most developers that want to directly interact with me, or people that I'm working with on projects, things like that. Even externally, this has become a great resource for people that I'm working with on a project basis or in a contracting basis to understand how to interact with me. All right. Now, I'm not saying that I match this perfectly, but this is the easiest way that I've found to say to someone, this is a statement of who I am, and this is how I like to work, and this is basically how I expect us to interact, right? For me, I'm standing in front of you. I'm expecting that we interact openly, honestly, directly. I'm looking each of you in the face. You're busy staring at me, right? That's a common expectation that we have. When you get a manager for the first time, you don't always know what that's going to be like. You don't know how it is to interact with this person. Are they going to be task-driven? Are they schedule-driven? Are they not interested in me at all because they're using my dev team to step to the next level and want to piggyback off my own success? You don't know that about the person. So there's a level of self-introspection and truth that needs to go into something like this for it to be valuable. But there's plenty of good opportunities for that to become available to help others. So this is like the biggest example I have of this one. All right, this is a skillful senior developer. He had his first one-on-one meeting with a senior team member, and he came in with a short document to explain how he understands his role, right? And gave that to him. It outlined how he understands his own role, what he is and isn't good at, and what gives him or drains his energy, okay? And of course, what he expects from me as a manager. So this is, Arnold's actually a manager in this case, but he's been given this README from a very senior member of his team that says, look, this is basically how I work, and this is how I would like us to continue to interact. This, for me, jumpstarts a whole bunch of the process of getting to know someone else and getting to learn how to interact with someone as a manager, and is one of the best things you can do to assist others. So talking about a development manager or some sort of team lead or project manager role now can help people understand why you make decisions the way you do and why you spend your days the way you do. Separately to the actual manager README itself, there's a topic that's quite similar in a book called Spark, which is about how you can lead yourself to greatness, but also how you can lead others to greatness, almost in equal parts. And the key takeaway, the key quote that I will never forget from this one was that a leader is someone that influences outcomes and inspires others. So there's a level of a leader is someone that inspires, sure. But if you peel that out, the two words there, influences outcomes, right, are the biggest things for me. Handing someone a manager README, or a README about Pat, so here's Pat's README, will influence the outcome that we have as an interaction, okay? As a senior member of staff, I would love it if someone did a self-reflection exercise themselves and came up with, this is how I like to work. This is how I'd like to be addressed. I don't want to be ever called. Please WhatsApp me all the time. I will never be on Slack. I will always be on Slack, right? Like simple things like that, outlining your common expectations, for me, influences the outcome of software delivery and your interaction with that person. Okay, success in that regard will drive the success of the project, or otherwise. But then hopefully you learn from it and you can move on and fail forward, and hopefully you can piece a few of these together and still make the project successful. But for me, that's setting expectations and influencing the outcome of that interaction. So those are the 4 stories that I had to tell you today. I've got just a few slides left and about 10 minutes, I believe. Yep, perfect. So I'm right on time. How many of you have seen this before? Yeah, a few. I don't know exactly where I got it from. I think this is the only slide in here that's not like publicly sourced properly, but basically I love it because there are no shortcuts, and the guy's tried to take a shortcut under a bridge, and all of a sudden now he's out here. Now, I didn't just put this in here to wake you guys up and make you laugh again. Basically, for me, this exemplifies failing forward. The guy's made a mistake. There's no way out of this one, right? You can't revert driving a truck into a bridge. That's a little bit hard. He's owning it, right? I don't know whether you see it, but he's currently outside the truck evaluating the situation. What can I do to fix this is, I think, what he would be thinking. Second to a whole bunch of expletives, of course. And, oh my God, what about my job? There are so many commonalities between life's, like real life situations. So the stuff that I've told you about today, I told you right at the start that it was, you know, not necessarily a technical talk. I told you that it wasn't necessarily even about software development. For me, there are so many lessons that you learn that you will pick up in life and move forward with that make you a better person. These are just 4 of mine, okay? And this poor guy, I think, has learnt the lesson not to drive under bridges without checking the height. So think positively, even when you've made mistakes, right? This guy's made a horrible, horrible, horrible mistake. He's obviously still learning. So think positively, right? It wasn't his intent to drive that into a bridge. Yeah, I hope. I don't know, I wasn't there, but I hope not. For those of you that are interested and have been taking some photos as we go along, I do have some homework, although it's quite weird to get homework from a presentation, so takeaways or conclusions or wrap-ups, suggestions that I have for you all. These are the books that I've referenced today, okay? I've mentioned these 5 specifically in the presentation. I'll just step out of the way so you can take a photo. Yep. But the other 2, I think, are more applicable to... Yeah, everyone good? No, not of me, just of the book. No. These 2 specifically, I didn't mention in the talk, but this is Patrick Coeur and this is Camille Fournier, whose name I continually mess up. I suck with pronouncing names. Basically, this is a book that's great for any of you that are senior or starting management, learning how to talk to tech leads. Could also be good for project managers, could also be good for people that are, product owners, business analysts, that sort of stuff. This is how you can talk to a tech lead and what sort of impact you're going to have in both directions, from them to you and from you to them, and how you can change that outcome. And Camille's book, I think there's a reason it's the biggest one on the slide, not just because it lays it all out prettily, but also because, it's the most valuable book that I think I've read from a technical person that wants to move into a managerial role. So if that's something that you're aspiring to do, please give that a read. It's written very cleanly in a chronological order. You can read the chapters up until it stops applying to you, basically. It talks about a developer, and then a senior developer, and then a team lead, and then maybe a project lead, and then maybe a team lead of team leads, and then maybe a senior team lead, and then middle management, and then project management, middle management, CTO, director, visionary. It's written in a nice chronological order, and it's chunked up into chapters quite cleanly. So I feel comfortable at this stage. I still take copies of that book, because I have many, many copies now, and handing it to someone and going, I think maybe you can read up until chapter 6, okay? Because that applies to you, and that will help you understand where you're coming from. There's some great lessons in that book. The manager README that I spoke about is a relatively new topic. It's gotten some backlash in the media, in the Twitter sphere, in the social media circles recently, like as recently as last week. But Oren, whose name I'm not going to try and pronounce, but Oren basically created a website, a very quick website for it, where you can go and read more about the theory of it, or one click, log in, click this button here, and then you can start crafting your own, and there's some nice prompts in there for him to say, hey, how would you like people to interact with you? How would you like people to schedule meetings with you? How would you like to be interrupted? How do those things matter to you? And so there's a lot of nice prompts there. If I've inspired you to go and create your own README, not saying you need to or you should, but if I have, this is a really great resource for that. And it's linked in the slide deck, but it's basically managerreadme.com, I think. If you're a developer, a senior individual contributor, a project lead, a technical lead, a design architect, a system designer, something like that, if you're not in a management role, or even if you are, and you want to evaluate the level of management above you, I would encourage you to play a game developed by Lara Hogan and visualized by Julia Evans, who goes by the title Bork on Twitter. And basically it's like manager bingo. It's hilarious, but you fill out each of the squares on the right-hand side here, and it has questions like, what gives you, so you need to basically answer the question, what gives you these things, all right? So, who in your life is a great coach, okay? Who in your life makes me feel heard and seen? And if that's your manager, or if that's your people from your support network, you can very quickly build this up and quickly see where and how you can get help. There's a lot more to it for this. I would advise you to go and read up about it if it's a game that you want to play or a thought exercise that you want to experiment with. The last one that I want to leave you with basically is don't be afraid to make mistakes. I've made plenty. I've shared just 4 of them with you today. There are many, many, many more than that. Don't be afraid to make those mistakes and to be proud enough to share them, I hope. Maybe that's a little bit more about my pride than about the ability to share. Maybe you don't share my same, deadly sin of pride, but don't be afraid to at least make those mistakes and do some sort of introspection as to how it happened. The last quote I want to leave you with, the last little snippet section, basically, comes from Obama, comes from his one of his inspiring speeches towards the American people, talking about America and its economy and how it was growing and succeeding. Very different to how President Trump talks about the American economy growing and succeeding. Instead, Obama said, no one can do it for you, right? No one person can help you to grow, or in his case, the American economy to grow, but you can't do it alone. Right? The reason that I've shown you the manager Voltron, the reason that I've spoken about manager READMEs, the reason I started with communication is because these are all tools that you're going to need to succeed. Okay? You can't do these things alone, and these will make you better at interacting with people. So that's it from me. Perfectly on time for Gerald to walk in. Do you guys have any questions? We got 2. Mm-hmm.
Which ones would you advise to use not just for work, but also private life?
I think the question was basically, of the books that I've recommended, what apply to your personal life equally as well as your professional development? I think nearly all of them. And I think it depends on which way you want to apply them to your way of thinking, right? So for example, the Jocko Willink Extreme Ownership book, right? You can talk about extreme ownership at work, and I gave you a great example of my extreme ownership in a work environment, right? But extreme ownership can also be, there's no traffic lights here, right? And traffic is failing because of it, so let me get out and help, right? Or you see an old lady struggling down the street and you take her trolley from her because you understand that you both want her to get out of the way quicker, or you want her to succeed, right? At getting home safely. So I think all of the lessons that I've spoken about today, yes, I come from a software development background, so the stories that I gave you come from a software development background, but I think that the parables in each of those stories, the mottos, the takeaways from those stories could be equally applied to your personal life. I hope. Cool. I think I'm going to wrap it up there because we're right on time. If you do have any questions, you can hit me up on Twitter or send me an email at my work email address here. I do need to put a quick shout out that we're hiring at Coolblue if you're interested in coming to work with me. So that one's on film now, and marketing's happy. But yeah, that's basically it for today. All right. So thanks.